the last building that we bought, we actually bought it for $11 a square foot. I physically can't build a 5-story building that is poured in place concrete and masonry for $11 a square feet. It's just physically impossible. So I have a competitive advantage compared to my competitors because I can come in below their cost basis.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 188. Today, we're going to talk about adaptive reuse of commercial space and how it can be turned into an asset class that is very attractive and extremely profitable. My guest today is Scott Krone. He's the managing partner of Krone Management Group, a company that teams up with investors to purchase and convert underused warehouse space into climate-controlled self-storage facilities. Scott has a Master's of Architecture degree from the Illinois Institute of Technology, and he's created 47 different syndications and currently owns over 400,000 square foot of storage facility space, which breaks down to about 2,759 different storage units, all of which are under management by Krone Management Group. Scott also has 25 years of development and design build experience, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show, Scott. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having us. We're looking forward to this.
Yeah, I have too, because I didn't tell you this before the show, but I've invested in self-storage, and I've been looking at this world of adaptive reuse, taking old buildings, whether it be a warehouse or a Kmart or a Toys R Us, and playing around with the idea of converting it to self-storage. I definitely want to talk about that with you, but before we go there, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started investing in real estate?
It was serendipitous in terms of how I got into it. Our family owned a die casting facility here out of Chicago. I was fourth generation. And when I went to school, I stopped, I didn't think I would be able to pursue architecture. I enjoyed it in high school, but I chose to go a liberal arts direction, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but I thought I'd sort of close that off. And my senior year, my father showed up on campus and said, "Well, what are you going to do next year?" And I said, "Well, I figure I'm going to go work for you." And he said, "You're not." And I was like, "Well, did I do something wrong? How did I get banished from the family business?" And he told me, we've decided to sell the company, and so that there won't be any place for you to work. And have you considered going back to getting, a degree in architecture? And I was unaware of that, and it was a brand new program that had just started up within the universities, and so I was able to get a 3-year master's degree in architecture, and that's how I got exposed not only to the architectural side of the world, but also into real estate developing, because my professor owned a development design build firm, and I worked for him while I was in school.
At what point did you start investing? Did you start right away with the converting warehouse space, or did you buy a property here or there to whet your appetite?
I was able to invest in one of the projects that I was actually managing with him. And then in 1998, I started Krone, and the first project that we did, we bought a property, we tore it down, and we built a new home, and we sold it. So I was 28 years old when I started Krone, and that was my first investment where I was in control of it versus participating under someone else's investment opportunity. It
sounds like you started Krone young, and it wasn't you didn't specifically start it to do the self-storage facilities. You built a spec home to begin with.
Right. And then we went from there to multifamily to mixed use. So first and foremost, I'm a real estate developer. I'm not quote unquote historically a self-storage guy. We've done everything from apartments to condos to mixed use. Right. We've done 4 churches, and we've helped the churches acquire the property, entitle it, design it, build it, get the financing, all those different things. And so, our background is real estate developers. And so I got into self-storage because the crash came in 08, 09, and the the speculative, either single family or multifamily side of the investment world just dried up completely, and we had to get into other areas. And that's when I began studying the self-storage and realized that even in a recession, or some would argue a depression, they were thriving. And so, but it was hard to find a distressed self-storage facility. So being a developer, I figured the best way to get into the industry is to develop them and then, own them and then sell them. And that's how I got into self-storage.
When you decided, okay, you're going to start developing, did you right away go to the adaptive reuse concept of finding the old warehouse space, or were you building some ground up construction as well?
We started with the adaptive reuse. We had a facility that was just south of the O'Hare Airport, and we actually had it for a different client, and the mayor changed her approval. She gave us a verbal approval, and it was more of like not even a verbal, it was more of like a head nod. And I just got a funny feeling that she wasn't totally backing what we were doing. And they called us a month later and said, you know what, the mayor had a change of heart. And so that's when we reached out to some clients and said, hey, look, there might be an opportunity to redevelop this facility. If you tell us, if it works for self-storage, then we can see if we can, develop it either with you or in conjunction with you. And that's how we got launched into it.
So you were kind of pushed in that direction at the whims of local government.
Exactly.
Okay, good. What a great way to get started. Let's take a step back here and just kind of talk us through, when we're talking about adaptive reuse of the warehouse space or the empty or whatever the space is that you're taking over, what makes that attractive to you? Why wouldn't you just build ground up, brand new?
Well, the first step is that, we're looking to, what makes it attractive is first and foremost the demographics. So we look at the surrounding neighborhood within 3 to 5 miles and figure out, is there demand for it? Is it undersupplied, or is the supply already being fully met? And so that is the first thing that we look for. The next is how big a facility. And so it has to be over 80,000 square feet. And so, between 80 and 110,000 square feet. And then we look at the zoning. So if it has those things, or we feel that we can get those things, then we can make it work. But then we're always looking for like a competitive price basis. So the last building that we bought, we actually bought it for $11 a square foot. I physically can't build a 5-story building that is poured in place concrete and masonry for $11 a square feet. It's just physically impossible. So I have a competitive advantage compared to my competitors because I can come in below their cost basis. And that's one of the things that we always look to do, is how we can make sure that our cost structure is below our competitors so that we can have more flexibility within our pricing.
So, okay, let's go back and talk in a little bit more detail about some of the things you just brought up. So the first thing you look at is the demographics. And are you doing a feasibility study at that point? Like, how many people live in the radius? What's the demand? What's the competition? That type of thing?
Absolutely. So before we go hard on a contract, we will always hire a feasibility consultant to do a full study for us. And we will not go into a market if the demographics don't support it. And so, that is first and foremost one of the first things that we do. Other than like looking at the zoning and, does the pricing work and those sorts of things. When we're starting to really do our deep dive, that's when we hire the consultants to do it, because we'll not only get the, what are the demographics, what should the unit makeup be, what is the pricing, and then we can begin modeling from a performer point of view what our total cost and revenue structure will look like to see if the economics will work.
And you like to be over 80,000 square foot. I think you said your sweet spot is 80,000 to 110,000?
That's correct.
Oh,
right.
Why is that? Why that size?
That is the size that the REITs are looking to buy. So ultimately, when we're developing these things, we have an end buyer in mind. So we're building towards their criterias so that we'll have an easier ability to sell these things on the back end.
The REITs, the real estate, what does that stand for?
Real estate investment trusts. So that would be either the privately held or the publicly held self-storage companies.
So they're the big boys. They're the ones who are going to come in and pay you a lot of money for what you just built.
That is the goal, yes.
Excellent exit plan. Your cost of construction per square foot. Did I hear you say $11 per square foot?
That was our acquisition price.
That's your acquisition. Okay.
Right. So we acquired the building at $11 a square foot. But when we're all said and done, we should be at 65 to 70% of the market cost basis. And so even if we refinance it out conservatively, our goal is always to return our investors cash as quickly as possible. And that way they stay in the deal, but their equity gets pulled out.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. So even before you sell to the REIT, you might build it, fill it up, refinance it, pull out enough money to pay back your initial equity from your investors. And then how long would you sit on it before you would turn around and sell it to a REIT?
Our philosophy on real estate is the best time to sell is when you don't have to. You can command the best pricing for it. So, the longer that we hold it, the more stabilized it will be, the more seasoned it will be, the higher pricing we'll get, the lower cap rate. So, but at minimum, we're looking at a 3 to 5 year hold period.
Okay. And talk me through the numbers then. So I understand you're looking for an acquisition of around $11 a square foot for what is it typically warehouse space?
Well, keep in mind, we weren't looking for 11. We got 11. So, we've paid anywhere from $11 to $22 a square foot. And even $22 a square foot is far below market, replacement cost. So we're looking for, somewhere between 80 and 100,000 square feet in that price range. But it's also going to be dependent upon what the rental rates were. So the reason why we had to get $11 for the last one because the rental rates were a little bit lower. So the decrease in the rental rates was offset by our acquisition costs.
And the rental rates would be what you would be renting the units out for per square foot once your construction is done.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've got a formula then that says, okay, if we're only going to get this much, we can afford to pay this much per square foot for acquisition. But if we can rent it out for much higher, then we can pay a little bit more per square foot.
Yeah, and obviously, if we get the pricing down lower, then it's more bonus to us. So that's always our goal.
What are some of the other costs then? You've got your acquisition.
Well, the answer, the other part of your question was what are some of the previous uses? The one we have in Chicago used to be the old Lincoln Log Factory. The one we were doing in Milwaukee was the first fireproof storage building in Milwaukee. Data storage was also in Toledo, and the one in Dayton it was a warehouse, a 5-story warehouse. Most recently, they've been holding like motorcycle parts in it or storing motorcycle parts in it. But in each of those cases, it's the more open and the more flexible the space is, the greater ability for us to get the unit mix that we have in there. So when we're looking at any of those spaces, they're all pretty raw. And so we're anticipating that we're going to have to put new roofs on the building. We're looking at putting new mechanicals. So we're putting in HVAC equipment, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, new electrical, new fire suppression, most of the time new elevators. So, and then obviously the lockers. So, it's a complete rebuild on the interior, and we're just the only thing on the exterior that we're addressing is either the windows or the roofing or tuck pointing, those sorts of things.
What's the range then per square foot of what you would typically spend for that type of build out?
It's going to be between $30 and $40 a square foot.
Okay. So that means all in, you would have somewhere in the $40 to $60 per square foot range.
And then, on the land and hard costs, and then we have the soft costs. So obviously we have to carry it during construction, and then we also have to carry during the lease up period, which is a 2-year lease up period. So the first year, we're actually paying the management company to work there because of the fact that we don't have enough revenue to cover those expenses. So typically by month 11, we should have enough revenue to cover our operational expenses, but then we still have to have the lease up period to cover our debt service period.
Okay. And I want to talk about that, like how you finance this, but I got a question for you. Did you say Lincoln Log Building near Chicago?
Yeah, it was the original Lincoln Log factory.
So they built the Lincoln Logs in that building.
Exactly.
Do they still make those?
I've seen them. I've seen them in stores, but I don't know where they're made. I don't know if it's gone abroad or where it's done these days. But yes, the original one was in Chicago. So
is it just a typical warehouse factory type building, or was it made out of Lincoln Logs?
No, you would not have been able to tell from the exterior.
Okay.
So
I'm picturing like a giant Lincoln Log warehouse factory
with a red roof and and green little planks and stuff like that. No, it didn't have all that.
Yeah. What a cool claim to fame there. Yeah. So then the question is, how do you finance this? How do you raise the money and put a deal like this together, especially knowing that you've got these carrying costs, which can extend out 2 years or more?
Everything we're doing, we're looking to maximize our investors' rate of return. And that's one of the things I think we do very well from a creative point of view. And when I say creative, it's not being overly aggressive, but we have utilized the sale of sales towers. We have utilized historic tax credits. We've done PACE financing and as well as opportunity zones. So our two projects in Ohio are both in the opportunity zones. And so we've established opportunity funds for our investors to have a tax shelter that they can protect their investment in it by investing in our facilities. And so, it's a combination of equity and debt. And so we go in with a very conservative, 65 to 70% loan to debt ratio. And then if we can get the PACE financing, we'll put that in the capital stack within the equity.
And I'm not familiar so much with PACE financing. What is that?
It's through the Department of Energy. It's the Property Assessed Clean Energy Act. And so if we're going and making green improvements to a building, so improving the green efficiency of a building, you can qualify for a financing mechanism that gets applied towards the real estate taxes. So they freeze the real estate taxes. They put the special assessment on it to finance the improvements that you're doing, and it gets paid out through biannually through your property taxes. So as a result of it, there is no traditional debt, and the banks don't see it as a first lien position. They come in as the first lien, and we pay down the cost of those improvements through our property taxes.
If you are thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition 5 years ago, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional healthcare insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. What does your loan typically look like? Because I know that you can get SBA loans that are quite attractive.
We have tried the SBA, but there's a couple of restrictions on the SBA. And the time that we actually tried doing it for the Lincoln Log Factory, and it took us 9 months. And they actually rejected us at the 11th hour. And so, we're a little gun shy of that. And so just because of the challenges that, the multi-tier step process that we had to go through on it. And so we have not done the SBA at this point in time.
Okay. So do you just do typical commercial bank type loans, or? We're
working with different, we've done credit unions in Ohio. We've done other local banks. So we try to utilize people, with respect to the PACE financing, they have to first have an understanding of PACE. So in Illinois, even though the state of Illinois has been approved for PACE, the city of Chicago has not. And so lenders here in Chicago have no concept of PACE because they don't have the legislation to back it. So in Ohio, we were opened up to a whole bunch more opportunities because of the fact that what the pace afforded us in terms of working with different lenders.
Are you able to structure your debt then in such a way that it helps cover your carrying costs for those 2 years that it typically takes to build and fill up a facility of this type?
Absolutely. So what we try to do is have an interest only and an interest reserve. And so those payments are coming out of the interest reserve.
Once it's all said and done, like what kind of returns do you typically expect compared to any other asset class like apartments or building houses? Your cost per square foot is much lower. Does that mean your profits are much higher?
Our margins are very good. Keep in mind, there's two different sides to that equation in terms of how we get to the profit. But our cost basis is totally about 65% of what a new construction would be. And then when we look at the revenue, our operational expenses, with an apartment building, they're typically between 45 to 55%. In self-storage, they're typically between 35 and 45%. So our operational costs are lower. Our construction costs are a fraction. I mean, we're typically 10% of what it would cost to build, 700 apartments. So each one of these facilities will have between 600 and 700 lockers. So consider that 600 or 700 rental units. Our total cost, is about 10% of what that would be if we were trying to build 700 apartments. And then when we look at our operational expenses, they're 10% lower than it takes to manage an apartment facility. So on a cost per square foot basis, the fact that we're getting anywhere from, call it $17 to $20 a square foot, we can get a much higher rate of, price per square foot on our facilities at a much lower cost basis. And so when we model out a development project, we've always modeled it out over 20% rate of return for our investors just because of the risk and the waiting period.
That's a 20% annualized rate of return?
Right.
Okay, so for once they get cashed out, their average return per year is 20%.
Well, it actually goes up because of the fact that if they have their cash back and they're still getting, money, then it only increases their rate of return.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. Can you take us through an example of one of your recent projects?
The first one we did is, we acquired it and we converted it and we were able to sell it upon C of O. And so on that one, we actually gave our investors a 35% rate of return on their investment. We held it for a 2-year period of time. And that was, acquisition, construction. And then we were actually renting out a smaller portion of it. And then we flipped the whole thing to a local regional self-storage REIT. And so we were able to return to our investors a 35% rate of return.
All within 2 years, huh?
Right.
Where can this type of investing go wrong? I mean, have you run into some challenges that have cost you some money or maybe caused one of your projects to not perform the way you expected it to?
Obviously, in any business, there's always challenges, right? It's how you solve those challenges. The biggest, in general speaking, for self-storage, the biggest challenge is if there's oversaturation, if there's too much product coming into a marketplace, that will certainly impact, your velocity or your pricing. And so you have to be cognizant of what other opportunities are out there and where your product sits within the overall supply and demand, metrics. And so that is the biggest hurdle. Obviously, having the right personnel. We've had challenges in terms of the past with having the right personnel, and we've had to make adjustments within our company in order to make sure that we were doing things better and doing them more efficiently.
What's the difference between managing this type of self-storage facility and, say, managing an apartment building?
It's much more fluid. You don't have the eviction problems that you have to have with apartments, especially here in the city of Chicago, where the laws are tenant friendly. They're not landlord friendly, and they're very heavily weighted towards the tenant. And obviously everybody needs to be protected, but in terms of like penalization towards an owner for not calculating the interest on a deposit exactly right can really destroy your entire building. So those sorts of things where they've taken the loss to the extremes. We don't have to deal with those sorts of things. Obviously, we don't have toilets, we don't have sinks, so we don't have those sorts of plumbing issues that we have to contend with. It's a lot easier. the move in and move out is a lot more fluid, and you can turn these things over a lot easier. But, keep in mind that first and foremost, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we are developers. We're not self-storage guys. So what we do, when we owned apartment buildings, we hired a property management company to manage the apartments and the tenants. The same thing, we hire the REITs that are actually going to become our buyers to manage the facility for us. So we in turn hire them out because that's what they do on a daily basis. They know the markets, they know the rental rates, and when we hire them, we're agreeing upon budgets and revenues and all those costs, all those sorts of things. And so we literally pay them to work in our facilities. And, we whatever profits are, then we keep the profits.
Do they have an explicit understanding that they'll be able to buy it from you when the time comes, or are you able to put it up on the open market?
We're able to put it on the open market. Typically, they ask for a right of first refusal. And so, it's not exclusivity, but, they like to see that, if we're here, we'd like to be able to have the opportunity to buy in it.
So you are, a developing company, Krone Management Group. Are you all in on this type of project, or are you developing other types of projects as well?
All in meaning are we exclusive to self-storage at this point in time?
Yes.
From an investment point of view, yes, we do. Krone Management Group is only doing self-storage at this point in time. As I mentioned, we've sold off our other assets in terms of whether they were single family or multifamily. We no longer have those in our investment portfolio. We do have a design build firm, and within that, we do work with people that come to us and say, "Hey, look, help me find a property, help me develop a property," and we do work in those realms as well. But from an investment point of view, our investment is solely self-storage.
Okay. And then with your background, you have a master's of architecture from the Illinois Institute of Technology. You obviously got like the architectural design background. How does that fit into everything that you're doing?
Well, I think it gives us a greater understanding of the whole process. And, let me take it, for example, if you're a client and right now we're working with a church, and the church had never owned a building before. They've been in existence for 20 years. And they said, "Hey, we're really frustrated. We keep making offers on buildings and then we never get them. How do we do this?" And I said, "Well, first of all, you got to stop acting like a church and you got to start acting like a real estate developer," which is pretty hard for a pastor to hear because, there's obviously the faith component built into everything. But I said, you got to be walking in faith, but still walking in the world at the same point in time. You can't walk fully one or the other, but you have to straddle that. And so you got to be making multiple offers, and so when we're looking at things, we're looking at making multiple offers. We're making, when we're making those offers, we already know what the potential design is going to be. And then we can model out what those potential costs are going to be. And so we can, with our background, both in terms of the design and the build and the development side, we can put together a more holistic approach to the entire process. And so that's what we did with them, with their churches. Okay, here's the property. Here's what you can afford to pay based upon what you want to do to the building. And here's how we're going to get you through the entitlement process. And here's how we're going to get the financing. And this is how much money you're going to have to raise. And so we literally do it from A to Z. We literally hold their hand all the way through the process because that's our experience. That's our background. And a lot of developers don't have that understanding of the design or the construction. They might just have one, or an architect might come up with the most beautiful set of drawings, but it's just like way too costly to build. And so, that is the strength of our company, is that we know the whole process, so we can come in and model it out very accurately and, work to create a solution that works from, a functional point of view, an aesthetic point of view, and a fiscal point of view. So, we look at all three components.
I feel like we've talked about quite a bit, and we've kind of gone through a good part of the trajectory.
Well, a lot of times people will ask, or like, how did you come up with this? And the biggest thing that I always try to do is to continuously learn and grow. So, every time that there's been a market change, I've doubled down heavily in terms of education. When the first crash came, I began being mentored by an incredible individual who has owned real estate, but he's done a wide variety of other things. And so anything that I can learn outside of the real estate world, I try to apply into our business. So whether it be how we set up the structure of our company or how we market the company or how, the investments we're looking at or how we can service different things. Those are all different ideas or concepts that I take from outside other businesses and apply them. So when a lot of people say, well, what's a great self-storage book or what's a great real estate book? A lot of times I don't have an answer for them because I'm not studying those things. I'm studying other businesses to see how I can apply them to our business.
So give me an example of that. Like, what have you taken from other types of businesses that apply to what you're doing with Coda Management Group?
My mentor, his name is Dr. Nito Kubain. And so, he currently is the owner of Great Harvest Bread and Lazy Boy, and he's on the board of BB&T Bank, and he's the president of High Point University. And so he's taken like a holistic approach to the university. Like, they want to teach the students how to do it, how to be an entrepreneur. So they literally even have a steakhouse on campus to show them how to properly eat at a steakhouse, so when they go to an interview, they don't look like idiots. And so,
wow.
So, the whole concept of how we could apply the entire development process to our customers, as opposed to someone just coming and saying to them, can you build me a house? Sure, I can build you a house. But there's so much more to just building a house than this, the framing of it. And so it's like, how can we hold someone's hand or guide them through the entire process so that they can navigate it in a more confident way, and knowing that, it's an A to Z situation, sort of like High Point University, where when you walk out, you know how to market yourself, you know how to dress appropriately for an interview, you know how to conduct yourself for an interview. And if you go to a nice restaurant and being interviewed by the CEO of the company, you're not going to make a fool of yourself. And so that is one approach that we've taken. Another approach is, I've been studying a concept called the Enneagram, which was developed by these 4th century monks. And there's a great book called The Road Back to You, which describes these personality endeavors of everybody. Everyone's broken down into 9 personality traits. And the point of it is that the better that you can understand yourself, then the better you can relate to yourself, but also you can interact with other people in a more healthy way. So if I can not only understand myself better, but I can understand the people I work with better, and then our customers better, we can increase our level of communication so that we can, try to pull away as many points of frustration as possible. So to give you an example, our director of construction, he's very intellectual about how he goes through the process, and he wants to make sure he understands it. And it's a very good trait to have. He's a Marine, and he's very good at, trying to avoid problems so he doesn't make a huge mistake. And that's one of the things we really like about him, is he's very thorough, and it's a great trait to have in your director of construction. Well, at first we told him, like, hey, make it simple for clients. Give them like 3 or 4 choices, find out what they want, find out what they're trying to accomplish, and then give them 3 or 4 choices, because most people get bogged down in terms of being overwhelmed. Well, we had one client that was actually their personality was very much like his. He wanted to understand everything before they would make a decision. And so it was becoming a point of contention, because they would say to him, well, how come I only have 3 choices? And I said to our director of construction, you know what? I think they're very similar to you. Give them everything as opposed to 3 or 4. Most people would want 3 or 4 choices. Give them every choice that's possibly out there. And I think you'll see that they'll come to a decision a lot quicker. And sure enough, that's what happened. They felt like they could understand all the repercussions. They could understand all the different choices and what the impact of those things were. And they began making decisions in a faster, better way, because they felt that they had more control. But if we hadn't known that, then it could have been a source of tension going back and forth. Like, why won't they make a decision? Well, let's figure out how we can help them make the decision faster and better. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Apply that to the church that you were working with, where they were having a hard time with the mindset of developing and finding the right property. How did that work out?
Well, the pastor, he's very familiar with this concept, and everybody on his staff has read through the book and has studied these concepts. And so and I didn't know that until we started working with him and we began talking about it. But he would be called like a romantic or a dreamer. So he always wants these grand visions in terms of what he wants for the space and what he's trying to create within the service. And so there's times where, we need to let him dream. And then there's times where we have to slowly pull him back because, the dreaming can cost you lots and lots of money, and so that's where we've tried to say, okay, that's a great vision. Here's a way in which we could accomplish that at a price that is within your budget. So our concept is we're always working within a budget. We're not telling you like you can't have something, but if we're going to do something, then it's got to come out of someplace else. So we're always trying to balance those things out with them. And so, we've recognized that when he has a conversation with our director of construction, sometimes he needs to bounce that off 2 or 3 or 4 different people and then come back and give us an answer. And so I might have to go to him and say, here's how I see it, or here's how I envision it, in terms of giving him reassurances like, yes, this does work, or yes, this will not work, because that space, the sanctuary space is a very, sensory type, important space as opposed to self-storage, right? Self-storage is just lockers. Do you want a 5x5 or do you want a 5x10? It's one or the other. We have to be much more cognizant of working with him in terms of what are the aesthetics of that space and how that will impact people's ability to worship in that space.
Real holistic approach you have to take there. Once again, remind us, what is the book that you're referencing?
The introductory, the very good cursory one is called The Road Back to You by Ian Morgan Krone. And it's Crohn. It's no relationship to me, so I'm not getting any residual income off of this. There's plenty of books about the Enneagram out there. You can take it very deep and very fully, study this concept. Yeah. It's incredibly powerful in terms of, first understanding yourself and then understanding others. But we just hired a new person in our office, and one of the requirements that we had for it was that before she came and started working with us, we asked her to read the book, and so that we would, it's inappropriate for me to tell someone what they are. Only they can describe it. But once they tell you what they feel that they are, then you can have that sort of conversation. And so, we asked her there's at the beginning of each chapter, there's like 24 questions that it takes you through. And, the more you go through it, you're like, yeah, that is me. And when one really settles in on there, then you get a sense of which one you are of these 9 personality types. And so, now now that she's told us what she is, then we can have the conversations, and I can relate my conversation to her so that she can best understand what we're trying to accomplish without creating these false walls of defense within the conversations. So, if I know that someone's going to react a certain way, then I'm not going to use those words because I'm not trying to make it loaded, but it might be the way I normally talk. But for that person to hear it, it might sound like a loaded comment. So I can change and take away those points where it might feel loaded, and so that it's just a comment rather than being a judgment. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is those judgment feelings in our conversations.
It's interesting. I 20 years ago I read a couple of books on the Enneagram, and I found it to be really interesting, and I sort of got obsessed with the idea that you could understand people by what is it, like 8 different parts of the Enneagram that kind of describe different personality traits?
Yeah, there's 9. So 9. The real basic ones are, 1 is like a perfectionist, 2 a helper, 3 would be someone who's driven by success, 4 would be, and I might be getting the order out of order here, but like a romantic. There's also an intellectual, a loyalist, an enthusiast. So they're always looking for the next greatest adventure. Then there's the challenger, and then there's the romantic. I'm sorry, the peacekeeper. The peacekeepers, the 9 ones.
Yeah, and you can be different combinations of each. So you can have a little bit, but you're primarily in 1 or 2 of those areas. That's sort of what I remember.
Yeah. So you're primarily in 1, but then you can shoulder 1 or the other. And when you're healthy, you will actually draw from a different characteristic. And when you're unhealthy, then that characteristic becomes very magnified and ugly. And that's really how you know which one you are. the one that you're like, ooh, that one really, that's not so good. I mean, that's typically how you can identify which one you are. Like my son, he had a bunch of friends telling him what they thought he was. And I said to him, that's not really how it works. It's the one that you're like, yeah, I'm that one. It's just the opposite. It's the one where you're like, that's an area I really need to work on. That's a good indication.
Well, it's a little unnerving because when you read it, you're like, yeah, I'd like to be that. Maybe that's what I am. Yeah. And then,
right.
And then this is where I got obsessed and about it was I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not that. Maybe I'm this. Oh my God, I'm that. No, so I kind of had to go quit it cold turkey. But it's really it's a powerful thing because you see that people don't. We tend to assume that people think like we do. Why doesn't this person see this the way I do? Well, it's because they're looking at it through a completely different filter. And when you read books like the books on the Enneagram, you can kind of understand where people are coming from a lot better.
And that's the biggest thing that we're trying to do now in terms of how we solve problems. Because as I said before, like no business is free of problems. I mean, that's why you make money is because you're solving problems. Ultimately self-storage is we're solving a storage problem for people. Like where do they keep their stuff where there's limitations. And so, how we do that, location, ease of access, cost, size, all those things take into consideration, but ultimately we're solving a problem. And the Enneagram is no different. Is when we're having a conflict or having an issue, and the issue is, it could be communication, it could be perception, it could be any of those things, how we can better relate and solve the issues between people. And a lot of that is understanding where they're coming from. So a lot of times we'll sit around the office and say, okay, what do you think this person is, so that maybe we can change the conversation and see if they respond better to them.
Wow, that is such a deep level way of thinking about relationship with people. Like what are they so we can understand how best to communicate with them. That's got to be a really helpful tool.
We found it to be. I mean, it's just not in business. It's, my family and my wife, my older kids, the whole concept of it is that it's based upon how you've been wounded or damaged and you're trying to cover things up. So, my youngest is like, well, what am I? And we're like, you're way too young. We got to screw you up a little bit more before you.
Give us a couple of years. You'll be this.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, I can tell you, I want the address of that steakhouse so I can go there and someone can teach me how to eat properly and not make a fool out of myself.
It's called Prime 1924. It's right on campus. The school spends over $1 million in losses. Because it's the same pricing as the cafeteria. So you can get the same cost meal at the cafeteria as you can in the steakhouse. And so there's a couple of requirements. You're allowed to go there twice a month. You have to make a reservation and you can't wear blue jeans. And if you miss your reservation, you're booted for a month. So my daughter goes there like once a week because she'll invite her friends, 1 week, and then her friends will invite her the next week. And they're like, okay, I can get a Starbucks for the same price, or I can get a 7-course meal that was steak. And so that's why they make a reservation and they go about it every week.
Are they actually training you like how to cut your meat and how to eat it and as if you were on a business lunch?
It begins even when you are supposed to look at the menu or when you're supposed to put your napkin on your lap and not rearranging the table settings and all that sort of stuff. So they'll put like a fake bug underneath a plate. So if you move the plate, they'll say now you've seen a fake bug and see you weren't supposed to do that. Or they'll begin the conversation like, have you ever been here? Here's the purpose of it. And this is how you should, they'll begin training the students. And so after the first time my daughter went there, she called me up and she goes, didn't get corrected one time. I'm like, well, at least I taught you one thing in the world, right? So that is the whole process that they take the students through.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Cause in business, a lot of us are self-taught. We didn't go to schools like that. We had to kind of figure out how to eat a proper meal in a business meeting on our own. And I can tell you, I probably get it wrong every single time. So having that kind of training would be extremely helpful for anybody in any type of business.
Absolutely. And that's how they approach it. They approach it holistically in terms of being an entrepreneur. So, they have Steve Wozniak as on campus as on faculty. They have the founder of Netflix is also on faculty. I mean, they really focus on training you to, be an entrepreneur. And so one of the things that we did as a company is I took our company down there to meet with the president and also experience the campus because of how holistic they approach it and saying, okay, what are the concepts that you can take away from this campus and apply to our company? And those are the types of things that we're always trying to do and develop and grow and how we can change because, the way in which business is done now is different than 5, 10, 20 years ago. We can't do it the same way.
That's really interesting. So I thought we were going to talk about self-storage, but we've gone off in a direction that's really fascinating. Why don't we bring it back though to you and your company and just like how people can get a hold of you and why they would get a hold of you, whether it's to invest in your deals or possibly hire your company, Krone Management Group, to help them with some projects. Krone
Management Group, the best way to get a hold of us is just go to our webpage, which is Krone, Koda, M as in management, G as in group.com. We have a bunch of resources on there for people that want to learn more about self-storage. So we have blogs, we have, feasibility reports. We have all those sorts of things out there, resources to help people get familiar with it. The Koda, our design build site is Koda, Koda, D as in design, B as in build.com. So we have KodaDB.com and KodaMG.com. And they both get to us. And, if you fill out your information, it will go to our director of sales and acquisitions. And then, we can begin the conversation and develop it from there.
Well, Scott, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. I love talking about the adaptive reuse, and especially when it applies to self-storage and to our climate control. And, just learning more about your philosophy and how you work the Enneagram into it, which is something I haven't thought about in 20 years. But now that you bring it up, it is a very powerful tool. So that's something for people to look into. I really appreciate everything you had to say. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great time. These are different passions that we have, and I always enjoy talking about them and hearing what you're doing as well. So thank you.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.